Brother David Peak.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate your thoughtful presentation and trying to clarify some of these things for us. I thought I'd throw a few terms your way and some softballs for you to kick out into the field. My understanding is the ultimate goal of the Marxist social justice movement is to end the hegemony, right? I don't know if I say that word correctly, but the patriarchy, even to dismantle the nuclear family, which we've done fairly successfully in this country. And so with that vocabulary, we're going to hear some of these words as we're thrust at us, and I wondered if maybe you had any comments on these or any other terminology that you mentioned sort of at the end that we might be aware of to try to be weary and to be protective.
Well, there are quite a few. In that little tract that I wrote, I put, it's a whole glossary in it, a bunch of words. But, well, for example, say race. They don't, when we think of race, they don't mean what you normally would think, black, white. They're looking at race as a group of disadvantaged people. It's not, in fact, I don't like the definition of race either, but they have a different definition that, so you could be talking to them and y'all are using the same words, but they have a different dictionary. And there's several words. Race is one. Even discrimination. Discrimination, they don't look at discrimination like we used to look at discrimination. Just, okay, they include that, but it involves, really, David, it involves, I wasn't going to say this, but since you brought it up, really, they look at white heterosexual men. You probably know this. White heterosexual men are the enemy. That underlies everything that they stand for. If you're white, in fact, they try to say, they don't call white people racist. If you look at it, when it first came out, they were saying all whites are racist. But the way they do, they define it like this. They say, the laws and statutes in the country have been written so that the dominant race benefits. That's how they write it. Well, who's the dominant race? They don't say white people, but that's what they mean. But if you read a lot of the literature, they'll say white people. You white males, y'all are in the bullseye. They really are. And that's another thing. They kind of stealthily, and like I said, me being a black person, I can relate to some of those things that they say, discrimination. I grew up poor and in the deep South, and, so I can relate to what they're saying. I just disagree with how they try to implement these things. See, all of us, like I said, we feel sorry for people who are poor and people in Appalachia, they're very poor. So, our heart goes out. But they try to use that sympathy against you. And I know a lot of people that are religious people, they're not members of the church. Well, some of them are. They got sucked in by that because they said, well, yeah, they are discriminated against. Gays have been discriminated against. Well, what are we going to do about that? Well, we try to sit them down and get a Bible in front of them, hopefully. But what can we do? Are we going to get a sign and walk up and down the street and say, okay, gays have been discriminated against? Well, they probably have. But I can't be partakers of other men's sins. I'm not going to do that. I sympathize to a degree, but I'm not going to do something crazy. But that's what has happened. A lot of people, good people have just kind of fallen victim to that because they feel sorry for people. And I do too, but not to that degree. I know I kind of ramble, but there are a lot of words. I went into detail in the little book that I did, because I did a lot of research on it. In fact, I'm going to call him out tonight. Glenn Osborne is the person that actually got me. Glenn, you remember you called me? Because Glenn said, Bobby, this stuff is all out there, and us white people, we can't say anything about it. That's what he said. And this was like, what, 3 years ago? And I said, he said, you're black, Bobby, you could probably say something. I didn't know anything about it until Glenn he ran into it somewhere. So I just started researching. I said, man, this stuff is really, really out there. And so that's how I really got into it, looking at it, because I didn't know anything about it. So, but it's really poisonous, but really, there's a lot of pushback right now. I'm not a political guy, but what has happened, a lot of pushback in this stuff, and a lot of companies are dropping these things, going on merit, saying, okay, because they've been hiring people just because they needed 10 black people, 10 Hispanics, 10 Asians. They've been just hiring people. And everybody a lot of people rose up against that, but now they're going back to merit. All this stuff is being pushed out. I don't think it'll be completely gone, but it won't be so prevalent like it is everywhere. You have people in the government having sensitivity training that, you need to go about. In fact, there was an article I read that there was some six-year-old kids had the right write something to apologize to all black people, for slavery. That was actually in the classroom. In fact, my granddaughter, she came home one day, I don't know if I told this story, but she came home one day, and this was at the height of this stuff, and she said, Papa, my friend wanted to tie my shoe for me. And she wanted to untie the shoe. She was 9 years old then. She wanted to untie the shoe and tie it back. That was an act of forgiveness, I guess, or saying, I'm sorry. They were doing that at the school in Bossier Parish, in Shreveport. Bossier Parish. So it was and I went up there, and I confronted the principal about it. I said, what are y'all doing? Oh, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know that. And then she said, well, my daughter is gay, and I would never stand for that. So this, I couldn't hit a lot of this stuff deep, or I couldn't talk about it, but it's a lot. I could have talked 3 hours on critical race theory, and the transgenderism, that's a really big thing now, really big. Like I said, I saw a video this week, as a matter of fact, preparing for this, and they asked the president, he was testifying before Congress, and this senator asked him, how many NCAA athletes do we have? He said 510,000. And he said, well, how many transgender? 10. And the senator said, you mean we're changing the whole landscape for 10 people? He didn't have an answer for that. But this stuff is really, I'm just rambling. Somebody can stop me.
Brother Nathan Batty.
Thanks, Brother Bobby. Appreciate what you've taught tonight, for speaking up, and for what you've written. It's been very helpful. I want to make a comment and then ask you a question about a couple terms. Seems like in the social justice, when I hear it discussed, or when I've had discussions, a lot of it centers around racism, critical race theory. And one of the things that always gets brought up constantly is the idea of slavery. And we would all agree slavery is wrong. You point out several things that both sides would agree is wrong, but how do we approach it? How do we deal with it? And it's easy to hear the topic of slavery come up, or oppression. Nobody agrees with oppression. What do we do about that? And it would be easy to get wrapped up in trying to join a social movement to eliminate some form of oppression. And just hypothetically, if slavery were re-invoked, we would not agree with that, but how do we respond to that? It's interesting that the biblical response is quite different. Paul sent Onesimus back. That's not the social justice reaction to that. That's not what we might naturally do on our own. And yet Paul sent him back. That's an interesting thing to keep in mind. Sometimes there are laws that we don't like that may seem oppressive in our mind, and yet we have to abide by the law. The question I want to ask is about a term that I've heard some use. It's called color brave. And the idea we shouldn't be color blind anymore, that's not a good thing, but we need to be color brave. Have you heard of this phrase or any thoughts
That's
on
a
that?
new one on me. The colorblind I had heard, but not color brave. That must be a new one. Go ahead. And what does it mean? Do you know?
Well, I was going to ask for an explanation from you. It seems to be more like that we need to recognize the distinction of color, and we do need to recognize that there is some oppression that is associated directly with color, and we shouldn't be just walking around colorblind, because if we are colorblind, then we're not helping the problem. We are part of the problem.
Yeah, right. That I've heard. I didn't know they had a term for it, but that must be the term they came up with.
Martin Luther seemed to have the idea that it's on merit, as you're talking about. How do we judge people? Is it on the color of their skin, or is it based on the qualities that they're showing?
Right. I think, the church, we probably haven't done a very good job, of really confronting that, Nathan. We get in our silos, and, I don't think I've done a very good job of really being, what am I trying to say here? I just, when I first came into church, people, friends of mine said, man, you over there with all them white people. You over there, all them, man, them white folks don't care nothing about you. What you doing over there? You and Art, me and Art, we go to these studies. And we took some heat, man, just from coming over here. I mean, just from being a member of the church. I mean, can you imagine? People, you say, them white folks, they don't sing right. Y'all can't sing, the songs you like. I mean, it was a whole checklist of stuff. And I couldn't argue with it, really. Really. I really couldn't. And, I just tried. My mom, just taught me, said, look, white folks are no different from black folks. My mom said, look, they want their kids to go to good schools, they want to have a good job, and they want to be safe. That's what we all want. I want my kids to go to a good school. I want to live in a decent neighborhood if I can afford it. So and Mom that's what she said, and that's the way I kind of lived. I don't see color when I see these guys. When we first came into church, there was a lot of racism. But people saw that we weren't going anywhere, and they just changed. The biggest redneck that was at the church when we first came there in 1980, Artie, you know what I'm talking about. The biggest racist, how you go out, shake hands. He would shake my hand like this. This is all true. But it took a few years. But because I just treated him just like everybody else. It took several years, but it got to a point where he would run me down to shake my hand, give me a hug. Wow. So if you it didn't really offend me because, I kind of knew. I grew up in the South. I know how things are. So but I didn't want to be like that. I wanted to show these people, look, I don't care what color you are, If you lie, you lie. But that's why I got interested, Nathan, in this critical race stuff, because it was I saw all these people on TV, black folk getting sucked in by it because they didn't understand it. These rich people, black celebrities, they were, thinking these guys need to read a book. They need to. So that's what got my interest in it. It's a long answer, but just.
Glenn Osborne.
I appreciate you. You did a good job.
Well, no, I didn't. I got the fumbling at first. Don't patronize me. See, what happened was I need some new glasses, and I didn't get them before I got here. And if you saw me, I was leaning, trying to read, because I couldn't see what I had written. So I finally got into a little bit of a groove, but I couldn't see. So anyway, go ahead, Glenn.
I got some new lenses. I just want to say, I really appreciate, I just want to take 1 minute to talk about myself for just a minute. I grew up in Oregon, which Oregon is not in the Bible Belt, and you might think, well, there's not a lot of racial people up there, you know, that have race problems. Well, just because, you know, our race problems was Japanese people, Chinese people, and it was just different. And, you know, but the whole point is everybody, there's racism all over the world and slavery all over the world. I mean, when you look at these historically, I was very tempted as a person to get into government. I've studied government in school to the point that I was getting involved. I was appointed to the Governor's Council on Youth. I was being groomed to go into politics as a person. I don't know if very many people know that, but I loved it. It's a temptation to me. I have to stay away. I really do. My wife will come along and she'll bash me upside the head sometimes. But people, then if you read some of the books, Kendi and some of these other guys, if you read the books, you'll get the understanding of what social Marxism really means. And a lot of people don't get it. But I tell you, it's absolute. I did everything to stay away from it until I read a book about the home and why they thought patriarchy needs to be destroyed, why the home needed to be destroyed. Burn it down, tear it down. The reason why is a lady was writing on feminism, and she said, we have tried and tried and tried for generations to change the culture's view of feminism, and we have been unsuccessful. We've been unsuccessful. Now's the time to do the nuclear option. The nuclear option to her and to those whom she influenced was to destroy the home. She said that's the only way to get women equal with men is to destroy the home. Now I tell you what, even though the woman wrote the book, I heard Satan speaking through the whole thing. Whenever you look at these issues from a spiritual perspective, the father of lies is the one that comes up. He's the one that's writing this story. How does God say to answer the problem? As opposed to how does the world answer the problem? This is very much a spiritual issue. And the devil wants to deceive Christians into thinking the only way you can be compassionate is take their view on how to handle these social justice issues. Don't bite. You will regret it. It is against all kinds of Bible. And I'm sorry, I guess people just don't. I've read the books, and this. Never mind.
Well, you know, let me take
This
it
is
back.
dangerous stuff.
You know, I didn't want to, when I was putting this together, I didn't want to, I could have got into all that. I didn't want to throw all that negativity out in the audience, but that's a lot. But the one thing that you alluded to was destroying the family and really overthrowing the government.
Yeah, because they want to burn
I mean,
the
literally
systemic.
overthrowing the government. I mean, that's really what they're working, toward. But anyway, go ahead.
And that's why the Frankfurt School came to Chicago, and everybody, I want to talk about the history. If you only knew some of the writings of these people, it is so. Oh, but I've got to end when I talked on postmodernism here, one of the keys of postmodernism is taking a word that you think you know, you think you understand, and giving it a totally different definition. You will not believe what the new word racism means. You need to send people into school to teach them about racism. They're teaching racism, all right. They are teaching racism. It's not against it, it's for it. And that's what I'm saying. You've got to read past what comes home with the paper from the kids, from the teachers. I'm sorry, I did get too much about this, but that's what postmodernism is. You take a word, redefine it. So thank you. I'm sorry, I've got to stop. But thank you for standing up, Bud. I really appreciate it. We have a kindred spirit, and I really appreciate it.
Well, you started it.
Sorry.
So
Sorry.
You started it, so you blame him because he's the one that started it.
But it's direct. If you don't understand, feminists don't want you to be equal to your husband. They want you to destroy your husband. They don't want the home anymore. They don't want the home. As long as the home exists, it's a threat to feminism.
Okay, we have 4 names, and we have about 10 minutes left, so we will probably will not take any more names now. Michael Hernandez.
Bobby, appreciate you, and I echo the things that have been said about all the work that you've put into this and the booklets that I've read. Appreciate that. I thought, there's people here in college, there's young people here in grade school, potentially going to college, and I thought maybe something that's more of something that they could sink their teeth into as we've learned the playbook, right? You mentioned how this society and culture has embraced this from time to time, and then it creeps into the church because we're not absent from working with the society, right? And we saw that in 2020, 2019, even church folks, posting getting on their favorite social justice bandwagon, right? And he can make all things feel right, you mentioned. And they're operating from a different dictionary. So do you think maybe some good advice as we potentially see this heighten again in society? As you mentioned, it's not going away. We can tamp it down, but we know who's in control of that. Maybe when you're in school and you see a petition or a club to sign up for your favorite social justice group or project, the best advice is to just stay away from that. If you're a Christian, we don't need to be having anything to do with those types of groups. That's my advice to people in college, to kids in school. Just stay away. They're operating from a different dictionary. Justice is not justice. And, it's interesting to me that in Ecclesiastes 8, the Bible says that marvel not when you see the oppression of the poor or injustice in the society, right? And we've seen it that I think we're excluding God sometimes. We got a big heart, we got a large capacity for grace, and we want to help people. And we can do that on the individual level. And so it's easy for us to get sucked into these immoral movements, but we forget God. God has taken care of injustice throughout history. Canaan was cleaned out for God's people. And he's done that over and over and over again. And when Jesus was born and all those 2-year-olds were murdered, Christians and Jews didn't take up their social justice mantle. God is in control when we have big problems like that in society. So do you think maybe some good advice for when this creeps up again to these younger folks and to ourselves? Stay away from the world's definition, any kind of doings with social justice in the world.
I agree.
Art Lynch.
Appreciate the presentation, Bobby. One thing I was just going to kind of piggyback on was, Nathan, you mentioned about Philemon and Paul sending him back. And, you know, one of the comments that Paul made about that situation was, as a Christian, he now was a different person. And so was Onesimus was, and so was Philemon. And so God's standards really can make a difference, and as was just said by Brother Mike, the difference we have to recognize is kind of summarized in 1 John 4:4, and that is the one that's in us, greater is he that is in us, and we've overcome them because he that is in us is greater than he that is in the world. The power of God we sometimes undervalue. And the whole point is, no matter what ethnicity or any of those things, if we don't have the power and the assistance and help of God, we're always going to be off track looking for human solutions. So just wanted to add that.
David Griffin.
Bobby, I appreciate your talk very much, and I'll defer my question because Glenn has already stolen my thunder. So,
Okay, Greg Gay.
Thank you, brother. Very good words and amazing. So, godliness with contentment is great gain. And how to help others appropriately deserves a lot more thought than what we may normally give it. So just tonight, someone said, I have a lot of old clothes. I know you're going to Africa. Can you take those old clothes to Africa? And that's a question I got since this started tonight. And I wrote back, no. And the reason I wrote back no is because I do not have room in my luggage this time, for one thing. For another, I don't want to rob those families of their dignity, of their contentment, and of their joy. Because the minute I walk anywhere in the world, even in some places in this country, like Midtown Sacramento, where I worked with the church there for decades, if we start saying, oh, you poor person, you're not like me. You don't have everything I have. Let me tell you how poor you are. I haven't helped them. And a lot of times I've noticed giving someone something helps the person who gives feel better, but it doesn't really raise the standard of contentment and joy for the person who receives. The parents who provide the clothing for their children, what a success they are. And no, it won't be the latest that we might buy in a store here, but there's a sense of accomplishment. And everyone wants that. They want an opportunity. They want a sense of accomplishments. They want a sense of being able to do things. And yes, there are times they need help, but it's not that they need someone else to provide all of the things that those visitors are used to back home.
Glenn, we have about 1 minute. Can you do it in 1 minute?
I want to say, first of all, I sat down and I was reviewing what I said, and it's not the racism movement, it's the anti-racism movement. There is an anti-racism movement that is racist. It's a racist movement. So I left the wrong impression. One thing I wanted to say, too, with the home, defending the home, the church is weak. We're not teaching masculinity and femininity anymore. That's a big deal.